going on, everyone, and welcome back to a new video with me, Adam from Green Auto Services. Today we have my personal Ford Fiesta. This is a 2010 1.6 Zetec S, and today we are changing out the rear axle bushes. Now these are super common to fail after a certain period of time. Although they're not going anywhere, it does make a little bit of a creaky noise. So this video is specifically looking at what you'll hear when driving if the bushes are worn, how to do a visual inspection and check them, and more importantly, how to replace them. So on that note, we are going to get straight into it. Whilst you're here, don't forget to like, comment, and more importantly, subscribe to the channel. So thanks for your support, guys. Let's get this vehicle straight in the air and I'll show you exactly what we're dealing with. Okay, so here we go. As you can see, I've got the vehicle up in the air and I've removed the road wheels for other purposes today. So let me just show you the setup, which is very typical setup that you'll find on Ford Fiestas at the back. So here is the solid rear axle, which holds both your rear coil springs, shock absorbers, and also holds your hubs with your drum brakes all on the back. One other common fault on these Fiestas, these rear coil springs, as you can see, they do start to corrode. These are the original springs from 2013. They are still together, although a bit corroded. They probably will break at some point, but at the moment they're still absolutely fine. Do keep an eye out for that, because if you do have a rattle coming from the back of your vehicle, it is quite likely the bottom of the coil spring's broken off and the bottom half that's broken is just literally rattling around. The reason why we're doing this video today is actually mounted at the front, bolted to the chassis, and just in here at the end of my finger, as you can see, they are the rear axle bushes that we're going to be replacing today. So you can kind of see just in between the frame and the bush housing there, or the frame and the axle there, the rubber is actually starting to deteriorate. Now, it doesn't look serious at all, and there we go, it's doing it on that inside one as well. Now, this is happening on both sides. As you can see, there it is, starting to crack in there as well. This side is probably worse, and this is actually where I'm hearing a lot of my noise come from as well. And we're going to get a lever bar in there just to show you the kind of movement that is happening because of this worn bush. So one early indicator sign that these bushes are worn: when you're driving down the road, you're going to hear either a very minor knocking noise, mainly a squeaking or a creaking noise. It wouldn't necessarily be a knocking noise, but it can sound like that. But you'll only really hear it over particularly bumpy roads. If you're going down the motorway, you're probably not going to hear this at all. So a good way to check these bushes is with the vehicle jacked up, preferably the whole rear jacked up, but obviously not on the axle. And you want to get yourself a lever bar and actually just get yourself in between the chassis bracket here and the actual axle housing as well, or the bush housing. You just want to get a lever bar in there, and you want to move that about. Just put some pressure on it. Now, there is not really a lot of excessive movement in here. You're not going to see that much. A moment ago, I actually just did this and actually got it squeaking. I don't know if you're going to get it on camera. Let's give it a go. Okay, yeah, you might be able to hear that. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not excessive movement at all. But you've got to remember, I'm just putting a certain amount of force using a lever bar on this. When the whole weight to the back of the vehicle is on the rear axle and it's all bouncing around, there is going to be more substantial movement. So that's one way of testing it. You can get your bar in at the side and you can push it side to side. And then this side as well. And again, it's not excessive movement, but trust me, you probably won't get any more excessively moving than that, particularly when you hear the noises, but that is enough to give you some creaking noises from the rear. So from here onwards, we are now going to get the old bush out and get new bushes in. So the very first thing we need to do is to drop one side of the axle at a time. If you drop both sides, it's going to be swinging all over the place and you're not going to have enough resistance or force to be able to get these bushes out, and that will become evident the further we get into it. I'd probably recommend just to disconnect this brake line, which is just one 13mm bolt just there. Give that bolt a good old clean up, and then just slowly undo that knot, because they can break. Then from there onwards, there is just what I believe 15 or 16mm bolts that actually allow the bracket to come come down, and then we'll take the bolt that holds it all in place out to expose the bush inside the axle. Okay, and before you begin, you are going to need some sort of transmission jack or axle stands if you're doing this on the floor to support the rear axle when we disconnect the bracket from the chassis, because this is all going to drop down on one side. And please do be careful. You want to make sure you're not putting any excess strain on the brake hoses, because these are quite short, so this will come down and put a little bit of tension on there. You are welcome to go ahead and disconnect the lines, and also do be careful about your ABS wire as well. It all runs and is attached to the rear axle, so when you drop that down, just be very conscious of that. I have done it before where I haven't disconnected it. There's a little bit of tension on there, but it's been absolutely fine, and you don't even need to drop down this rear axle that much. So I'm going to now go ahead and do that now, and then we'll get back to it once this bush is ready and accessible. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. It's been a while since I've done these bushes. You do have to drop both sides of the axle to be able to get it low enough to do these bushes. It is still connected at the rear shocks. The coil springs are still in place, but do be careful. If it goes a little bit too low, these coil springs can fall out. I've also gone ahead and just taken the ABS wire out of their mounting brackets. Let's come around here and show you. You've got some rubber collars here which just locate in this metal groove. The brake line is still connected, but I've lowered it down enough just to make sure that there's no excessive tension on that brake line. Although it does look like there is still quite a bit of play. Now that I've taken the bracket off, as you probably saw in the video, here is the axle bush itself. Now I'm going to try and do this one-handed with a camera and a light. As you can see, this actually looks a lot worse once you've got everything out of the way. So this is the center point where the bolt goes through and mounts. As you can see, we have got quite a bit of movement in that. So if you imagine the weight of the vehicle is making that move around, that is going to be excessively moving and creating a lot of abnormal noises. From this side, let's get you focused in there. As you see, it's even worse on this side, which is, yeah, I would definitely say that is gone. So what we need to do now is get this bush out. One word of warning though, you'll probably notice we have a groove which is actually in the bush itself, which does come with the new bushes, and you can probably see there is actually a bit of a lip. So it's pretty thin here, it then jumps up to a thicker part. Now this is there for a reason. These bushes do have to go in at a certain orientation. So before we do anything here, we actually want to, one, get the new bushes and make sure they look correct. Two, before we do anything with removing this, we need to get something to mark exactly where these points are on the axle, because the new ones have to go in at exactly the correct orientation. So there's two ways you can do this. You can either make some scratches or grooves in the outer axle housing itself, or you can use some Tipp-Ex. Anything that you can do to make sure you know where the correct position is before you put the new ones in. So what I normally do when it comes to marking up positions of anything that need to go back in a certain orientation, there are two methods that I'll use. The first one is a sprung-loaded centre punch. It will just make a small, tiny mark in the outer case so I know exactly where that position is going. And then two, I'll just double up belts and braces. I'll just use some Tipp-Ex so I can clearly mark specific areas on the bush before removal. So I'm going to make my mark with this ridge on the actual rubber outer diameter, and that's gonna go Sorry if my head's in the way. Okay, and there is a nice clean mark just under there as well. I will make a mark up here too for the groove which sits in the middle there. There we go. And just in case, for belts and braces, to give me a good visual aid, I'm going to mark that up with Tip-X as well. So even if the Tip-X gets washed off with brake cleaner or water or anything like that, I still have the original marks to go by. But at least that gives me a really good visual aid of where the new one is going to press in. Okay, so now we are at this stage. Here is the new bush that we're going to be pressing in. Now, I've already checked over for diameter and just in general the ridges on the end to make sure it is exactly correct. And it looks like it is. There is actually one minor difference. Now, when I get the old one out, I will put them together and show you what that difference is. But basically, the center of this metal, let's just call it a big metal sleeve, which is where the bolt goes through. This one, on the new one, is actually a smaller diameter. Now, it could be a modification, considering how common these faults are. Basically, you've got less metal, but more rubber to take more absorption. Perhaps it's stronger. I'm not too sure. Although that is different in size, the one thing I'm going to do very quickly is just put the bolt through here that obviously secures the bracket to the axle itself, just to make sure it does go through, so we're not going to have any problems. However, in regards to everything else, it all looks absolutely fine. One more really important thing that I completely forgot to mention. So these bushes, as you can see, we have got quite a large lip on one side, so these are designed to not only orientate in one direction, they can only be pushed in and pushed out in one direction as well. So in this case, the lip is going to sit on the outside, so when we push it in, it's going to go one way, but to get the old bush out, it's going to be going back the way that it went in. So make sure you're pushing it out the right way. This is where the fun part begins. Now, I say fun part, it can be really frustrating actually. These bushes do not come out very easily. I don't have a tool to press them out because I'm going to need a lot more force to get the old one out, because once they're in there, boy are they in there. So the one tool that I'm going to use to get it out is going to be a pneumatic air chisel. Okay, here it is, and one pneumatic air chisel. This does make my job a lot easier, but it is super noisy, it can be super dangerous, so make sure you are wearing the appropriate protection. Now, I'm sure there's a few ways a lot of other people can do these. If you are a fellow mechanic or know a better way to do it, by all means drop me a comment, it will be awesome to hear. So, please be careful, this can really damage the actual metal housing itself. You just want to make sure you are very slowly chiseling away at not only the rubber, but more importantly, the plastic, the reinforced plastic that holds everything all in place. So, bear with me, if you do this yourself and you haven't got access to one of these, yeah, it's going to be a bit difficult. A big hammer, a big chisel, and you could be there for a while. But if I know any more ways of doing it, which is going to be easier for you guys, I will make sure I let you know in a future video. So, on that note, let's get straight to it. Okay, so as you can probably see, I've just started very slowly going around the edge. You are going to nick the outer edge of the axle, but that's okay, as long as you're not cutting it half or putting a fracture in there. But this is a good indicator here. I've actually started pushing the plastic casing away towards the inside, and I'm going to slowly work my way all the way around to the point where it will loosen itself, and then the next thing you know, it will start moving and pop out the back. Okay, so that is the first bush done and pushed out. That actually took a little bit longer than I care to admit, but persistence is key here. Like I said, I am fortunate to have a pneumatic air chisel. If you're doing this by hand, yeah, good luck. It's pretty tough. Anyway, there we are. That is the old bush. Now I'm going to get you zoomed in a little bit. is absolutely done for. Now, to be fair, it looks a heck of a lot worse because I've been attacking it with an air chisel. But essentially, that is your bush pushed out. This is the reinforced plastic casing, which is the big resistance holding that in there, because it's supposed to hold itself in there and not come loose. But unfortunately, the rubber perishes a lot quicker than the reinforced plastic. So that is that out. I'm going to give you a closer look at the housing for the bush. We do need to clean it up. This next step is very, very important, especially for when it comes to pushing the new bush back in. So let me take you off the stand and give you a closer look at this. Okay, so here is the housing to the bush. Now, you are going to notice straight away, you are not going to be able to avoid it. You're going to get a couple of tiny nicks out of the corner here, but that is okay, as long as it's not anything too substantial and it's going to crack across the front there. Same on the inside. Oh, it's a little bit dark. It's a little bit rough around the edges. But we're going to give this a thorough good clean up. So what I would normally do here, I do have a belt sander. I'm basically just going to go around the outside and just smooth it all down. You don't have to take off too much, just the rough edges. Just make sure there's no sharp edges and it's nice and smooth for the new bush to slide in. So you want to take off as much of this surface corrosion as possible. I would then get a wire wheel and clean thoroughly the inside of this, because again, we don't want any resistance or any corrosion for when the new bush goes in. And as you can see, we have retained our marks, one there and one there, so we know the orientation of which way the bush has to go in. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that up now, and then we are going to get everything prepped for the new bush. Okay, so this is my linisher or sand belt. So that is one tool that I use to take any sharp bits and clean down the edges of the outside of the axle housing or the bush housing. And then I've just got a wire wheel, which fortunately fits in there absolutely perfectly. So now that I've done that, you can see we've got a much nicer, cleaner, smooth housing for the bush to press into. Take your time, get it nice and clean, make sure there's no sharp edges, especially from the side where the bush is going to go into, which is this way. There was actually a small sharp bit on the inside there I've just licked off with the belt sander there, and on the other side as well, just giving that a really good clean up. This side was the side that I was attacking a little bit more. It looks a little bit rough, but this side isn't going to have too much of an effect on the actual final result. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get the new bush lined up with the marks as previously marked before we did anything. I'm going to get the tool set up, and then hopefully we can get this new one pressed in. Okay, here we go. So this is the tool that we need to press this in. So we've actually got a large metal face to push on the bush itself. Now, as we put that through the axle, we're then going to have another disc which is going to hold it against the outside or the inside of the outside of the axle, if that makes sense, which is then secured with a locking nut. And what's going to happen is, because that is holding it against the axle, as we turn this nut in, it is going to pull it all together and therefore push the bush into the hub. Now, what I have done as well is actually just got a little bit of oil and just lightly coated the inside of the housing. It's going to allow the bush to slide in a lot more easier. If it's going in completely dry, then there's going to be a lot of resistance, there's going to be a lot of pitching, and there's going to be a lot of horrible noises actually. What I've also gone and done is marked up on the end in line with the notches where the bush needs to be located, so it just makes it easier when putting it all together where it needs to be before I start tightening it up. There we go. So that's all now set up. So in theory, all I need to do now is just to continue to tighten this nut, and it will slowly start to pull the bush in. So let's do that now. Fingers crossed. Okay, apologies. So just to let you know, the actual tool that I got specifically for this job turns out that it hasn't quite got everything I need to be able to do it. So I've kind of mixed and matched with something that I've got in my tools. So all I'm doing now is literally just slowly starting to wind it in. And because of that oil that I just coated on the inside of the axle, it is actually starting to slide in absolutely fine. As soon as it starts going, it actually becomes quite easy. So you want to go all the way in until this shoulder meets the end of the axle. Okay, now I've actually exhausted the thread with the deep mill sockets on that side, so I'm going to start winding in this side. It should effectively do the same thing. See, now although this is going absolutely fine, the problem I've got now is that you've got to remember this part of the bush will actually protrude out further than the actual housing when it's fully seated. So we basically need a really deep cut to allow that to naturally come out until everything is nice and flush. So I've got one of these items that just goes over the end, holds against the outside of the bush housing, but it's got plenty enough depth to allow that to naturally come through. So that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, there we go. And that is all now flush, so we can now take it apart, and the bush is in there and all done. Okay, and there we are. So that is the bush, now nice and flush with the end. That deep socket I had on the end here, that allowed this centre part to protrude naturally as it's meant to sit. And as you can see, that top mark has lined up perfectly, as well as that bottom mark with the lip. So that is in the correct orientation, that is correctly installed. So from here onwards, off camera, I'm going to go and do this one, but then when we're ready to put everything back up, I'll bring you back in, we'll get the bracket back on and get it all bolted back up to the chassis. Okay, welcome back guys, here we go, they are all done. So this just goes to show how temperamental they can be. So this was the worst side, this is the offside rear. That took me approximately about half an hour, 45 minutes just to get it out. Once it was all out, went in absolutely fine. This one, however, I nearly tapped it and it fell out. And that is literally just the most annoying thing ever. But do you know what? Sometimes that's just the way it goes. Anyway, that is the new bushing on the near side. That is the new bushing on the off side. So now we just need to put everything back together in reverse order. And just before I do, here are the old ones again. So that is the offside rear, that was the worst one that took me ages to get out. And this is the near side rear, that took me 30 seconds to get out. There we go. So it looks worse for wear because I've obviously hammered away at it for God knows how long, but they had definitely failed. And actually a lot of the times when you do take these out, these centre parts will actually just fall out because they've completely decoupled themselves from the actual rubber mounting. So there we go. Awesome to see it before and after, isn't it? Okay, so as you just saw there, I've now put the brackets back on both sides. So you just want to nip it up, then loosen it off to make sure that that bracket can free spin just like that. So when we put it back up, we can get the axle into the correct position and then tighten that up. Okay, so as you can see, both the brackets have now been secured on both sides with the 3 bolts up to the chassis. So just don't forget, the bolts that actually hold the bracket to the bush through the centre are still loose. So if you imagine the vehicle is going to be down on the floor, the suspension is actually going to be sat naturally further up. So what we need to do now is, before we tighten off the brackets, we need to lift the rear axle up just before it starts lifting the car, and then we can tighten up the bolts, and then everything will be secure in the correct position. Okay, so that has literally just started to lift the vehicle. So I've left it there, so let's get that tightened up. Okay, there we are guys, that is everything absolutely done. So if you don't have access to a large transmission stand and a ramp, you can always jack the vehicle up one side, use a jack to lower the vehicle down on the axle whilst you take it all apart. It is a really difficult job. Make sure you have the right tools if you want to give it a go, but you can open up a can of worms. They are pretty temperamental. Everything is now tight and done up. Everything is now been let down. I'm going to go ahead off camera and just get all these wires back into their positions, get the wheels back on the vehicle, and there we are. That is how you replace the rear axle bushes on a Ford Fiesta. Okay, and there we have it. We are all done for the day, and that is how you replace the rear solid axle bushes on a Ford Fiesta. If you want to give it a go yourself, by all means, persistence is key. You can get a little bit unstuck, so take your time, invest in the right tooling, and I'm sure you'll be absolutely fine. But it isn't for the faint-hearted. You can open up a can of worms. But by all means, if you don't want to do it and you've just liked the video, enjoyed it, or perhaps even learned a little something, then you should know by now, hit the like, drop me a comment, and more importantly, please support the channel and hit that subscribe button. I would be super appreciative. On that note, thanks again, and we'll see you guys in the next video.